Well, one night, Alexander the Great, or so the story goes anyway, Alexander the Great couldn't sleep. So he went out and walked around his camp. And as he was walking around, he came upon a soldier who was on guard duty but was asleep. As Alexander approached him, the soldier woke up and realized what was happening. And he was scared because the penalty for falling asleep on guard duty could be death. So Alexander walked up to this young soldier and he asked him, "What is your name?" His answer, "I'm Alexander." He wasn't quite sure if he heard that correctly, so he asked again, "What is your name?" "Alexander." He asked a third time, "What is your name, soldier?" "My name is Alexander." And Alexander the Great said, "Well, then either change your name or change your conduct." You see, that soldier's behavior was not fitting for anyone named Alexander. It didn't bring respect to the name Alexander. Now, do you call yourself a Christian? Are you a follower of Jesus? Does your behavior fit? As we continue gleaning wisdom from the book of Proverbs, today we're going to look at 3 character traits that fit the people of God. These are character traits that bring respect both to you and to Jesus when you live them out. These are respectable traits. Now, they happen to all start with H. I didn't plan it, it just happened that way. But 3 traits. They are humility, honesty, and hard work. So we begin with humility, and then we want to ask, what does God think about pride and humility? Well, we're going to begin here in Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 16. It says, "There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers." Now, it starts by saying there are these things that God hates or that are an abomination to him. The idea is that these things are ethically and morally speaking are repulsive to God. They are detestable. They are terrible things. And so these are things that are totally opposed to the ways and character of God. And he says there are 6 things, and then he goes on, he says, well, actually there's even 7 things that the Lord hates or that are an abomination. This tells us that this is not a complete list, but he's giving us some samples of things that fall into this category. But he's doing this and he's making a strong point. God hates these things. And you can't miss that point. And what's the first thing he mentions? Haughty eyes. In other words, a person who is looking down on others. Eyes that look at someone else with disdain. This is arrogance. Thinking that I'm better than you. This sin of pride being expressed on the face through the eyes. Now I want you to notice what is the third thing on that list. The third thing on that list is murder. And so we have pride and murder here on the same list. And I only make that point because we often have a tendency to say that pride is not really that big of a deal. But I'm making the point that no, yes, it is. Turn to Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 34. Toward the scorners, he, speaking of God, toward the scorners he is scornful, but to the humble he gives favor. Scorners are people who ridicule others or put others down and think that they are superior to other people. And he says, to those people, God is scornful towards them. In other words, God, you think you're so great? Well, God is going to put them in their place. But he is favorably disposed toward the humble, and he will help them. In fact, James and Peter both echo this sentiment. In fact, they probably are quoting this verse when they say, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. It's pretty clear what God thinks about pride and humility. So what are the benefits of humility and the consequences of arrogance? Turn to chapter 22 and verse 4. 22:4 says, the reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. Now, notice here that humility and the fear of the Lord are put together in this verse. They're related. That when we revere God, when we are in awe of God, we also humble ourselves because we humble ourselves before God because we recognize God's greatness. And at the same time, we humbly recognize who we are in comparison before Him. And we're told here that God rewards those who are in that right relationship with Him, who revere Him, and who are humble before Him, and who fear Him. Turn back to chapter 11. Now, I told you we're going to be all over. We're going to be all over this morning. Chapter 11, verse 2. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom. Now, the word translated pride here has a specific nuance of an arrogant person who always has to have their own way. All right? And he says that this person who always has to have their own way, because apparently they think their way is always the best, this person is setting himself up to be disgraced. He's acting as if he knows better than everyone else. He's building himself up, but that will crumble. And then we have this word that's translated humble. This word for humble here has the idea of humble submission or obedience to someone else. And we're told that this person who has that attitude, that humble attitude of submission and obedience, is wise. Now we also see this in chapter 16. Go Proverbs chapter 16 and beginning in verse 18. So 18 and 19. It says, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. It is better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud. So he says, pride and arrogance will bring a person's downfall. Now, how does that happen? Well, for one, it puts you at odds. Pride, being arrogant, puts you at odds with other people. When you are prideful and you are arrogant, and it shows, it's really a selfish attitude. And we see that in people who are just not team players, because it's all about me. And it's all about my way. And so it puts you at odds with other people. Other people don't want to be around you. They don't like you. They don't want to work with you. In fact, it's hard to work with someone who is like that. But secondly, it puts you at odds with God. Remember what we just read. God opposes the proud. So if you are arrogant, you are really setting yourself up for trouble. And the proverb here says that you'd be better off to be poor and humble than proud and wealthy. So we often think, oh, what's great? Well, it's great to be wealthy, not great to be poor. But he says, hey, it's better to be poor and humble than it would be to be wealthy and arrogant. In other words, it's better to have less money, less stuff, than to be opposed by God and suffer the consequences of that. And we can see an example of this in King Uzziah. It's in 2 Chronicles, you could read it. But King Uzziah became king when he was 16 years old. And he did really well. And God made him successful. He had a great army. I mean, they were strong. They won many battles. He had gone out and built cities, fortified them, made big fortresses. He did all these things. He was powerful. He was famous. But then he started thinking it was his own doing. He started thinking that it was because of himself. And he became arrogant. He even went so far as to think that he could disobey what God had told them and decide his own way to worship God. And he headed to the temple with plans to do things his own way. But he was met at the temple, let me get my number correctly. He was met at the temple by 80 priests who stopped him and said, "You don't do that." And when the priest stopped him, he was upset. He was angry because he was arrogant. And God gave him leprosy. God opposes the proud. Now, it doesn't always show up in leprosy, but God opposes the proud. Well, turn to chapter 18 and verse 12. Before destruction, a man's heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor. Humility comes before honor. The way to honor is through humility. And now, again, that may seem countercultural to us or counterintuitive, because the person who's going to put himself out there is going to be honored, right? Well, no, he says the way to be honored is through humility. And we see this exemplified in Jesus. If you read Philippians 2, it says that Jesus humbled himself, becoming a servant, becoming a man. And he even humbled himself to the point of death, even death on the cross. But then what happened? God raised him up and God exalted him to the highest place. Humility, and he was honored. Humility is the way to honor. So, speaking about being humble, how about some wise advice? Turn to chapter 27. Proverbs 27, verse 1. (27:1) says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring." Now this sounds a whole lot like what James had said, right? James said, don't go around saying, well, I'm going to do this and this and this. He said, what you should say is, if the Lord wills, if God wills it, then I will live and do this or that. In other words, the point is, you don't know what tomorrow brings. You don't control tomorrow. God does. So don't be arrogant and think that you do. All right? Don't be arrogant. Verse 2, chapter 27, verse 2. "Let another praise you, and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips." Now, this says something. It's not wrong to be praised. It's not wrong to be told, hey, you did a good job today. It's not wrong to be told, hey, you're good at that. But don't go around saying it yourself. Hey, I did good today. I'm good. He says, just let someone else do it. Don't do it yourself. Chapter 25, verses 6 to 8. He says, "Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence, or stand in a place of the great. For it is better to be told, 'Come up here,' than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. What your eyes have seen, do not hastily bring into court, for what you will do in the end, what will you do in the end when your enemy puts you to shame?" Now, he starts out saying, hey, it's better to be humble, and to be told you deserve better than to be arrogant and be told you're not as good as you think you are. You're not as great as you think you are. In fact, Jesus made this same point. Remember the story he told about the people going to a banquet? And Jesus said, when you go to the banquet, you don't go to the best place, find the place of honor and go seat yourself there. He said it's better to go seat yourself in a less honorable place and be told, hey, you deserve more honor, come up, than to be told, there's someone more important, more honorable than you. Can you move down? So Jesus said the same thing. In other words, let others give you honor rather than honoring yourself. And then he also says here, that talks about this running to testify. The thing is he's saying it's better to be slow to speak because you may not have all the information. And some people just want to be the person in the know. They want to be always talking. They want to be looked at. They like the attention. And the picture here is of someone who runs in to testify about something they saw. But then all the other information comes, and then you look foolish because you didn't see everything. And you set yourself up as an expert. And so the points of these things, the advice for us then is don't demand the spotlight or think too highly of yourself. Let other people honor you if it's deserved. And then 1 Peter 5:5-7 says, clothe yourself, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. See, this verse says, all of you be humble. So don't be arrogant in your interactions with each other. He's talking to believers here specifically, but he says, don't be arrogant in your interactions with people. Be humble towards others. You see, humility is not thinking too highly of yourself. It's putting others before yourself. It's not demanding your own way over the ways of other people. It's doing things God's way, even if it's hard. And sometimes that may even bring suffering to us when we do things God's way. But doing things God's way and trusting God to take care of things. And if you humbly submit to God, then he will exalt you at the right time. That right time may be when Jesus comes back, but he will exalt you at the right time. So that's humility. Let's move on to character trait number 2, honesty. What does God think about honesty, integrity? Well, first of all, we already read one thing. Remember that list of things that God hates? The list of things that were an abomination? Well, lying was on that list, and being a false witness were on that list. So dishonesty made the list twice. God hates it. And in fact, in Proverbs 12:22, it says, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. So God detests lying and dishonesty, but is pleased and highly values truth. Look at chapter 11 and verse 1. Proverbs chapter 11. (11:1) says, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Using a false balance was actually forbidden by the Old Testament law. Now let me explain what that means. Many times, or sometimes, some people would carry two different sets of weights, because they would buy and sell like grain and whatever they had grown. So they would carry two different sets of weights. One was heavier and one was lighter. One they used when they bought, and one they used when they sold. So it was a way of really taking advantage of the system, and without people knowing it, you would put one set of weights on there, so when you were buying, you got more than what you really were paying for. or when you sold that you were giving less than what the other person was paying for. So it was deceptive. It was cheating the other person. You were taking advantage of people. It was dishonest. And God says it's wrong. And in fact, it's an abomination. It's repulsive to God. In fact, God then speaks through the prophet Micah. In Micah 6:11, he's talking about this kind of situation. He says, "Shall I acquit the man with wicked scales and with a bag of deceitful weights?" God's saying, should I let him get away with it? Should I act like it's no big deal? And the answer is no. He's basically saying that can't go unpunished. God does not like this dishonesty, this cheating of people. Well, let's move on then to the benefits of honesty and the consequences of dishonesty. Still in chapter 11, verse 3, it says, "The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them." And verse 5, "The righteousness of the blameless keeps his way straight, but the wicked falls by his own wickedness." So it says integrity guides the person, the righteous person. If you have integrity, you just live and you do what's right. It's easier in that sense. It brings smoother life. It's easier because it's not confusing. You know what's right and you just do it. You're not having to have this conversation with yourself, well, should I do this or should I do that? Well, if I cheat, I can get ahead. If I do this, I can get it. No. You just do what's right. There's no question. It's not confusing. You see, being honest leaves you with fewer obstacles to dodge in life, but being dishonest drops landmines in your own path. Consider just this one thing. When you lie, when you tell a story, what do you have to do? You've got to remember that story. Right? If you just told the truth, well, that's easy. You just tell the truth. And what happened? Well, this is the truth. When you make up a story, you lie, you have to remember your lie so you don't get caught, so you don't get figured out. And so you have to remember it, and they're like, well, what would you do? And they're like, oh, what was it that I said? Where did I say I was Friday when I didn't come to work? You have to remember your story. Not only that, but you may have to embellish that story because they start asking questions. And it grows and it grows, and you end up digging yourself deeper and deeper until you're trapped. And then if you're caught, at the very least, you look foolish. But it could cost you your job. I mean, people won't trust you. And depending on how bad it was, you could go to jail. You see, being dishonest hinders yourself. It causes problems for you. Chapter 19. Verse 1, 19:1. "Better is a poor person who walks in his integrity than one who is crooked in speech and is a fool." We read something just like this when we were talking about humility. It's better to be honest and poor than to be a dishonest fool. You see, the dishonest person here is equated with the fool. A fool is a person who ignores God, and in doing so brings ruin upon himself. Chapter 20, verse 17. "Bread gained," this is a funny one, or interesting one. "Bread gained by deceit is sweet to a man, but afterwards his mouth will be full of gravel." We may think telling a lie is helping you. It's sweet at first. Oh, it's helpful. It's good. because it gets you out of something, or it maybe gets you some advantage. Even though it's clearly wrong, and we've read that God hates it, many people will lie in order to do that, to get out of a tight spot, to gain some kind of advantage. And so many people justify their lies. Oh, it was just a little lie. Oh, it was helpful in the end. But what this proverb is saying is, yeah, sin may be fun for a time. It may taste good, but it's short-lived. And even if it is fun, or even if things do go well for you, it does seem to help, it's still wrong. And then you have to deal with the consequences and the guilt. In other words, you're chewing on rocks. Chapter 26. Verse 28. A lying tongue hates its victims, and a flattering mouth works ruin. Have you ever thought about that? Telling a lie is actually a hateful thing to do. Because what it does is it shows that you care more about yourself than the other people, than the person you're talking to. And he says that if you deceive someone through flattery, you flatter someone to get what you want, it can hurt them. And it can bring problems, both for you, for them, or both of you. Telling lies sometimes seems helpful, but it's not a good thing. And it ends in trouble. So some wise advice. Turn back to chapter 4. Verse 24. (4:24) Solomon writes, "Put away from you crooked speech, and put devious talk far from you." Now this is very straightforward. What's he say? Don't lie. Don't deceive. Don't be dishonest. In Colossians 3:9 says, "Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices." Now here's the thing. Our world may say that there is nothing wrong with lying, at least until they are hurt by someone's lie. Then they say it's bad. But generally, oh, no big deal. But in Christ, you have been given a new life. And with that new life comes a new way of living. And so Paul tells us, so don't lie. That's not you. It doesn't fit. Rather, Paul also writes in Philippians 4:8 that whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. In other words, be truthful. Pursue truth. Truth is what's honorable. Truth is praiseworthy. And think about this. Truth is an essential characteristic of God and of Jesus. And you are a follower of Jesus. You are a child of God. So lies and dishonesty are a direct contradiction to who you are in Christ. It doesn't fit. But truth does. Truth and honesty and integrity is a central part of our lives as followers of Jesus. Well, now we come to the third trait, hard work. But let's first talk about the ways of the lazy. Chapter 26, Proverbs 26, and verses 13 and 14. The sluggard, now the sluggard is just another word for a lazy person, kind of like a slug, but a lazy person. Verse 13, the sluggard says, "There's a lion in the road, there's a lion in the streets. As a door turns on its hinges, so does a sluggard on his bed." Now what's happening here is the lazy guy is making excuses not to work. He's saying, there's a lion out there. I can't go outside to work. That lion's out there. He might eat me. Or today someone might say, well, I can't go out. It's raining. Or, I can't go out. It's too sunny. I've heard them both. There's always a reason. For the lazy person, there's always a reason not to work, not to do things, to just stay in bed. In fact, he may even believe his excuses, but he's really just stuck to his bed. He says he's like in his bed like a door stuck to its hinges. You know, the door moves back and forth. It doesn't go anywhere. It just moves. But he's just there rolling around in bed. Well, I'll turn over here. Well, I'll turn over. He's too lazy to get out of bed. But we know he can move because he rolls over. So we're not talking about someone who's incapable of getting up and doing stuff. He just won't. He just doesn't get out of bed. This gets even better. Look at verse 15. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish. It wears him out to bring it back to his mouth. Oh, I'm so hungry. So he grabs a whole handful of food, but he's like, oh, I just can't lift it. He's so lazy that he can't bring it back to his mouth. Now, this is absurd, and I'm sure this is an exaggeration, but he's making the point. Yeah, laziness is absurd. That's what he's saying. He's like, that's the way the lazy guy is. He's like, oh, it never makes it to his mouth because it's just too hard. Being lazy doesn't make sense, and it's not wise. But, look at verse 16. The sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. In other words, he's so lazy and it's so obviously foolish, but he thinks he's wiser than everyone else. He thinks he knows better than everyone else. I'm smarter than everyone else. My ways are better than everyone else. And so he's always got a good reason not to do this or that. And he'll tell you, he'll say, well, you know, it won't work. So we might as well not do it. You know, I don't think we should because it's not going to really help. Well, you know, that's not really necessary. It's not needed. He's always got a good reason. I mean, or maybe even it's just simply like, well, you know, it's just not the right time. Or he might say, well, I have an easier way. Well, really the easier way is just don't do it. But I have an easier way. See, he's always full of excuses and always has a reason, a good reason why we shouldn't do things. But in reality, he's simply justifying his own inactivity. He's justifying not doing anything. He's justifying his laziness. Look at chapter 20 and verse 4. Verse 4, the sluggard does not plow in the autumn. He will seek at harvest and have nothing. So he avoids hard work. When it's time to plow, time to plant, he's just like, oh no, I can't do that. He lists all his good reasons. And he says no. And so he doesn't do it. He avoids hard work and he fails to plan ahead to get the work done. But then, when it comes time to harvest, he goes out and says, where's my food? He still expects results. There's nothing there because he didn't do the work. And he's surprised by that. You ever done a group project with a person like this? At school or work? They expect all the work to get done, although they won't do anything? Yeah. Well, that brings us to the benefits of hard work and the consequences of laziness. Look at chapter 12. Chapter 12, verse 27. It says, whoever is slothful will not roast his game, but the diligent man will get precious wealth. We have the lazy person here. He doesn't enjoy the fruit of his work. The work that he actually does do, he doesn't enjoy it because he quits. And so here we have this picture of this guy who goes out and he hunts, and he actually manages to catch something. He brings it home, but what's he do? He doesn't roast it. He doesn't cook it. He's too lazy to actually prepare it, so it just sits there and rots. He gets nothing out of it. So he did a little work, but it comes around to nothing. He's a quitter. And so the little work he does him no good. On the other hand, you have this person who works hard and who keeps going and will finish what he started. And he gets to enjoy the fruit of his labor. He's able to succeed. He has something to show for his work. He is rewarded for his hard work. Chapter 15 and verse 19. It says, the way of the sluggard is like a hedge of thorns, but the path of the upright is a level highway. You see, the lazy person makes trouble for himself. He hinders his own progress. It's like saying, okay, here's the pathway, and I'm going to plant thorns in front of me so I can't make it through. And that's what he's saying. He says the lazy person hinders his own progress, but the upright person, the hard worker, has a smoother road. Let me give you just a simple example of this. You get up in the morning and you put on your shoes and you say, I don't feel like tying them. You've seen this. It's usually a little kid, but you've seen it. And they're walking, you walk out the room and you trip over your shoelaces. And you keep walking and you keep stumbling over your shoelaces. But you're too lazy to bend down and tie them. So rather than tie them, all day long you're tripping over your shoelaces. I've seen parents tell their kids, tie your shoes. 5 minutes later, you see them tripping over their shoelaces because they never did it. All right, I'll move on. You put a hedge of thorns in your way. Chapter 10, verse 26. Like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to those who send him. Have you ever tasted straight vinegar? Yeah. Even if you like the taste, it's still strong. It's still pretty harsh. Have you ever sat around a campfire? And no matter where you go, the smoke seems to blow in your direction. But it gets in your eyes. And what happens when that smoke gets in your eyes? It burns. And it makes your eyes water. It's an irritant. And this proverb says here that just in the same way, the person who does who doesn't do his work, the person who is lazy, is an irritant to his employer or his supervisor, or you could even say his co-workers. He's irresponsible. He doesn't do what he's supposed to do, and he causes trouble for everyone around him. On the other hand, there's the good worker. Look at chapter 25, verse 13. It says, like the cold of snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him. Now, the point of this is that snow comes with cooler weather, cooler air. And so if you've been out working hard during the harvest time and it's hot and all of a sudden this cool air comes and the snow comes, it's refreshing. That's what he's saying. He said that the honest person, the hardworking person is refreshing. The person who does his work, he benefits his employer or his supervisor, and you could say his co-workers. He's helpful, and his good work is refreshing. It's encouraging. He makes life easier and better for those around him. And because of that, he's well thought of. He's respected because he does what he's supposed to do. Well, how about some wise advice about working hard? Chapter 6. Chapter 6, beginning in verse 6. He says, "Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her fruit in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep and a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. So he says, learn a lesson from the ants. In other words, go look at ants. You ever seen ants marching around doing their work? Yeah, no one tells them to do work. No one, but they take the initiative and they work hard. They instinctively know that they need to store up food, and they do it. And so he says, so look at the ants, and don't just lay around. Get up. And he says, get busy. If you just stay in bed, nothing gets done. But he's not saying just be busy for the sake of being busy, but he's saying go do what needs to be done. And at the one point, he says, it talks about a little sleep, a little folding of the hands to rest. And then suddenly it's too late, and you've got nothing. It seems to me that he's saying don't procrastinate. Oh, just a little more rest. Oh, I'm just going to relax a little bit longer. Well, I'll get to it a little later. And suddenly you're out of time, and you're not done. Ephesians 4:28 says, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor doing honest work with his hands so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. So he's basically saying don't just take from others, but work hard to provide for yourself. But then if you notice, Paul adds this part. That part of the reason for working is so that you would have resources to help others who are truly in need. And so work hard to provide for yourself, and so you have the privilege, the ability to help others who need it. And then 2 Thessalonians 3, verses 10 to 12 says, for even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. For we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busybodies. Now such persons we command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living. Now here he's specifically talking to the believers in the church. So followers of Jesus in the church. And his point is, if you are able to work, but you refuse to, well, the church is not to support you. They're not to feed you. In other words, they're not to encourage your busybodiness. They're not to encourage your laziness. The idea is if you let them be hungry, they might learn, oh, I should go to work. And so we're talking here again about someone who is able to work, but is being irresponsible. And he says, let them learn to be responsible and work. But the point is simply don't be lazy. Be good workers. If you are a follower of Jesus, then do your work and earn your living. And then Colossians chapter 3, verse 17 says, and whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Verse 23 and 24, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. Now, did you catch that? Whatever you do, it's for Jesus. Whatever you do it to honor Jesus. Now, sometimes we may think, well, what I do at church is for God. Or when I'm talking to someone about God, well, that's for God. But when I'm just doing regular stuff, like whatever things in life, like maybe even going to work, cleaning my house, shopping in the store, even just walking down the street, well, that's different. That's just regular life stuff. But what's it say? Whatever you do, everything you do, those things are not just disconnected from your relationship with God. Whatever you do, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus. So work hard, do your best. Do it for Jesus. Live to bring honor to Jesus. I'm just going to close by reading for you from Colossians chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. He says, "And so, from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God." We've been talking about wise living, about living in a way that is respectable. When you are humble and honest and hardworking, people will respect you as a person of character. And it will help you, it will be helpful to yourself and to those around you. But most importantly, when we live our lives, we want to live our lives to reflect and honor Jesus. We want to live to please God. So be humble, be honest, and work hard. And people may respect you, but more importantly, God will be pleased.